We are going to talk about the Fire Brigade Union. It's almost 2 years since Grenfell, 72 people losing their lives in that fire in West London. The Fire Brigade Union say that the government, despite that, isn't doing enough to prevent further tragedy, revealing what they're calling a postcode lottery of preparedness among fire services to deal with such a blaze. They say 40 fire engines were sent to Grenfell Tower on that night, yet some fire services plan to send as few as 2 fire engines to deal with any future high-rise fires. Let's get the view now of the General Secretary of the Fire Brigade Union, Matt Wrack. Good morning to you, Matt.
Good morning.
That's quite a stark contrast. 40 fire engines to deal with Grenfell, yet the planning seems to be going forward, if that were to happen outside of London, to only send 2. Why is that?
Well, we've got a complete fragmentation of the fire and rescue service in the UK, and we've got a government that doesn't seem to have a clue what's happening in the fire and rescue service, including what's happening in relation to planning for a normal fire, a compartmented fire in a high-rise block, or something that goes far worse than that, as it did at Grenfell. So the question is what fire and rescue services plan for on a day-to-day basis, and again we've got a whole postcode lottery between 2 and 7 fire engines planned for blocks that might be almost identical, and that seems to us completely unfair to the people living in purpose-built blocks of flats and to firefighters trying to do their job professionally. And secondly, that in terms of planning for a major fire, if the fire spreads beyond the original flat, as it did on a huge scale at Grenfell, a complete lack of planning for incidents on that scale.
Matt, perhaps you can give a bit of insight here into what you think is behind this lack of preparedness, as your report have put it. Is it the government failing to understand the seriousness of this issue and not properly learning the lessons of Grenfell and high-rise fires that happened prior to that? Or is it money? Do they not have the money to put in to the fire brigade service to deal with these kinds of incidents?
I think it's utter complacency. I think the central government is utterly complacent about it. They assured MPs a year ago that in a letter that fire services would be ready for a Grenfell-type incident. They then backtracked on that and said that fire services would have at least a limited ability to respond to high-rise fires. They then say that actually the matter's a local issue, so they seem to have no concern as to whether fire and rescue services are planning across the country to prepare for a day-to-day fire in a purpose-built blocks of flats, and secondly, after Grenfell and after the worst fire since the Second World War, whether we are planning on a sufficient scale for a similar incident.
Matt, must be very stressful for your members. I mean, what's going through the minds of firefighters in terms of, you know, firefighters up and down the country will have seen what happened at Grenfell, will know what their colleagues were going through at that time. How stressful is it for them knowing that if they were called into action to a similar scene, they might not have the resources to be able to do their job?
Well, I think firefighters will act professionally as they did at Grenfell and do their best in whatever circumstances. I think firefighters outside of London, for example, are absolutely appalled when ministers claim that fire services elsewhere would be able to share resources and tackle a fire on that scale, because everybody knows that fire services, the London Fire Brigade, stretched, but fire services outside of London would have nowhere near the resources that were available to tackle the Grenfell blaze. So it's appalling, and as I say, it's this feeling of that what we face is deep complacency about fire and rescue service policy and the state of the fire and rescue service, and that's completely unjust in the aftermath of Grenfell, both to the people living in purpose-built blocks of flats and to firefighters who might be asked to respond to them.
OK, Matt Wrack from the Fire Brigade Union.